Gear up for yet another captivating experience as we delve into the next story, set on a bitterly cold winter dawn with mercury levels well below the freezing point. On that particular morning, Vana found himself maneuvering through the desolate, ice-laden wilderness of the eastern taiga. A heavy snowstorm from last night made it necessary for him as a woodsman to inspect the connecting roads between his log cabin and the neighboring settlements for any potential hazards. Except for the occasional far-off sound of gusty winds, the scenery felt worryingly silent, stripped of normal wildlife sounds. Nonetheless, as Vana was passing through a zone with deep snowdrifts, a faint troubling noise reached his ears. It was a distressing call, bearing an uncanny resemblance to a child's cry. Momentarily perplexed, Vana wondered about the likelihood of a youngster being out in such adverse weather. His instincts hinted that no sensible parent would expose their kid to such an environment. But curiosity got the best of him. Thus, advancing onwards, he soon figured out the origin of the call. Astonishingly, it was not a human child, but a tiger cub almost concealed by the snowfall. Only its tiny, semi-frozen nose peeked through the white blanket. Unmistakably, it was a Siberian tiger, an endangered species hardly encountered in these secluded regions. With extreme caution, Vana approached the lodge cub, skillfully maneuvering through the perilous, snow-filled zone. He dedicated close to 30 minutes cautiously excavating the snow around the young tiger. During this task, he discerned that the cub had a wounded leg. Making use of some logs and his tools, Vana devised an ad hoc sled for transporting the cub. With gentle hands, he fastened the worn-out creature onto the sled. Observing its eyes droop into a sleep caused by exhaustion in the overwhelming ordeal, Vana anxiously made his way back to his refuge, combating the frosty air and his own exasperation. Once they reached the cabin, he immediately got to work. His priority was to create a warm space. He kindled a fire and relaxed the tiger by giving it some milk, attempting to provide urgent nourishment. Subsequently, he focused on the cub's injured limb. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic, which the cub seemed to mildly resent. Twitching at the unfamiliar scent, Vana then delicately adjusted the broken limb, firming it up with a medical brace and wrapping it up securely. Once the health intervention was in order, he organized a snuggly little resting area by the hearth for the young feline to rest. The charming fire's heat and the secureness of the cabin presented a clear juxtaposition to the chilly, perilous world outside. It was within this unforeseen haven that the Siberian tiger cub commenced its recuperation voyage. This was the unanticipated and often remarkable encounters that are symbolic of wilderness life. Drained from the day's occurrences, the juvenile tiger cub finally succumbed to weariness and drifted to sleep. Inside his humble cabin, Vana couldn't suppress a quiver of apprehension concerning the ferocious creature inhabiting his space. However, he realized that leaving the cub to its fate was not an option. The tiny tiger was far too defenseless, and its existence too invaluable to disregard. Faced with no practical alternatives, Vana constructed an impromptu enclosure to house the cub, resolving to take care of it until it could fend for itself. Happily, under Vana's attentive supervision, the tiger cub flourished. The damage to its leg mended fully, even though it left behind a significant mark. Fortunately, the mark did not interfere with the cub's maneuverability. Initially, having the tiger cub in his log cabin seemed unreal, almost as if sharing living quarters with a supersized domestic feline. However, as the days rolled by, the cub expanded notably, initially to the size of a hefty canine, and ultimately, it exceeded even the biggest of dogs. Vana developed an emotional bond with his impressive partner, whom he lovingly christened Bank. Knowing that their shared journey had an expiry date, Vana started aiding Bank to adjust to life in the wilderness. He designed stimulating hunting exercises, placing food up on trees, or dragging it around the forest ground to sharpen the tiger's predatory skills, particularly when he noted Bank eyeing a local's goat. Vana understood it was time for them to go their separate ways. Fortunately, Bank wasn't going to face the wilderness on her own. During their strolls where Bank had usually tailgated him, Vana saw a young female tiger observing them from afar. Her interest in the uncommon relationship between human and tiger suggested a prospective companion for Bank. The day for Bank's reintroduction to the wild finally came. Vanna prepared a meal and began a day-long trek, with Bank padding contentedly nearby. As they journeyed further into the forest, Bank picked up the scent of the female tiger. His body stiffened with intrigue. Feeling that the time was right, Vanna gingerly stepped away, allowing natural instincts to reign. Just as all appeared to be moving in the right direction, Bank, aware of his caretaker's withdrawal, spun around and bounded back towards Vanna. Vanna called out in vain as Bank continued toward him. The time had come for their ultimate farewell, a time they knew was inevitable, but for which either of them was truly ready. In a desperate attempt to instigate a reaction that would ensure both their safety, Vanna tossed a stone at the big cat. The stone brushed the tiger, inciting a roar of puzzlement from Bank. Vanna, sorrow in his heart, turned away from the tiger and continued on his way. It was a tough choice to leave his companion without a second thought. Deep within, he assumed that Bank might show up at his wooden house, but Bank was missing. Vanna did not encounter him during any future patrols. The memory of their last meeting lingered worryingly in his mind, yet he found comfort in thinking that this separation was for the best for Bank. Over time, the hard pang of guilt slowly subsided, turning their last moment into a distant, woeful remembrance. Vanna's life maintained an outward appearance of normality until he began to display unsettling symptoms. He found himself losing a significant amount of weight due to constant unease that made eating difficult. His once enjoyed lengthy forest strolls were now marred with exhaustion and weakness. Reluctantly, he agreed to undergo a series of blood tests and scans, which confirmed his worst suspicions. Vanna's kidneys were deteriorating, and his outlook was bleak without medical intervention. Vanna felt conflicted. The idea of abandoning the forest in his role as a forester was as dreadful as death itself. Aware of the perils of postponing treatment, he was still hesitant to leave his cherished wilderness. One day, as Vanna wandered the forest, his mind was shut in gloomy contemplation of the past. Recalling the days when Bank would joyfully tread alongside him, he didn't notice the bitter odor of smoke slowly enveloping the surroundings. It wasn't until the smoke became thick and breathing became difficult that he recognized something was amiss. He looked up and saw a swiftly spreading forest fire that was threatening everything in its path, including him. Vanna's first thought was for the wildlife in danger. Moving quickly, he sent up an alarm to ready a firefighting response. In his intent to combat the impending threat, his mind constantly circled back to Bank, the tiger he cherished dearly. He was hopeful this tiger would continue to live unfettered in the wild even when he's no longer around, and that his urgent warnings to the forest keepers about the swiftly spreading wildfire were heard. He knew his actions would potentially save many lives. However, it placed him, Vanna, in considerable danger as the wildfire neared perilously close. Even as he tried to escape, his deteriorating health took a significant toll on his physical abilities. Not so long ago, perhaps 2 years, he could have easily outrun such a threat. But his current state made every breath laborious, and his legs felt heavy as he stumbled and collapsed. His consciousness fading, he grimly realized he lacked the strength to get back on his feet. The forest fire was closing in, ready to engulf him. In his dwindling moments, he found himself envisioning his mortal remains scattering over the scorched land, merging back with the post-blaze earth, almost a suitable return to nature. In his faint state, he experienced an uncanny feeling. He could feel a force tugging his arm and nudging his shoulder with urgency. It appeared unreal as he felt a wet movement on his face and then an assertive hold on his clothing by strong jaws. Then suddenly he felt a life form pulling him away from the blinding heat and choking smoke into the welcoming coolness of breathable air. Struggling to open his eyes, he saw a grand vision of a Siberian tiger, its distinctive light orange coat apparent even through the haze surroundings, retreating gingerly. The tiger, with an evident scar on its leg, a remnant of an injury that almost took its life once, was now giving him a second chance at his. Vanna recognized this tiger as Bank, the one he had aided once. In this critical moment, Bank had come back to reiterate the value of life to him. With the tiger's help and his newfound determination, Vanna managed to pull himself up. Realizing how narrowly he escaped the deadly grasp of the wildfire, his emotions got the best of him, The bond they had developed was still strong, and Bank had risked his life to rescue his human companion. Vanna couldn't hold back his tears as he watched Bank retreat back into the dense wild. The beast silently assured him it was not his time yet. He understood he needed medical attention for his health and returned to the forest he so loved, healthier and stronger. He didn't just owe it to himself, but also to Bank, whose brave gesture was an indispensable reminder of the preciousness of life. The air in the Australian zoo was heavy with expectation as Caitlin, a majestic tigress and the last of her lineage, was on the verge of delivering her offspring. Her labor cries reverberated through her habitat, creating a stirring tone for the evolving situation. The zoo staff, particularly Ken, Caitlin's favorite keeper, watched anxiously from the display screens. Caitlin was not a regular creature. She embodied the potential survival of her kind. Today she was predicted to bring twin cubs into existence, an occasion infrequently seen in tigers. As the zoo held its breath before the arrival of daily visitors, Mother Nature continued her course. Caitlin's labor proceeded with a powerful primal grumble, signifying the commencement of introducing new existence into this world. Settling down, she drew deep breaths and focused, letting out a quiet snarl with every contraction, a sound symbolic of both her strength and her frailty. Hours peeled away as the labor's intensity heightened. Her growls grew louder, echoing off the enclosure walls while the whole zoo seemed to stand still and wait. Then, with an assertive roar shaking her environment, the first cub made its entry. If you're enjoying our content so far, feel free to support us by hitting like, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell to never miss our stories. Now back to the tiger. The zookeepers burst out in jubilant applause, witnessing the entrance of a sturdy male cub, decked in stripes as dark as the evening. However, their exultation was abruptly muted when they saw the predicament of the second cub. It was born lifeless and non-responsive, its small frame showing no signs of vitality, lying limp on the ground. The zoo was engulfed in an eerie quiet. Ken held his breath, his heart sinking with the reality of the situation. Regardless of understanding the risks, they all had hoped Caitlin would experience her motherhood without concerns. Caitlin, an exemplary specimen of her kind, with stripes that shimmered like sunshine rays cutting through a thick foliage, now bore a moment of intense grief. Her deep caramel eyes, loaded with stories of survival in the wilderness, reflected her anguish. Caitlin's existence had been full of trials. Native-born, she had to face the harsh facts of the jungle at an early age when her mother was poached, leaving her to fend for herself. She had to adjust to the merciless wilderness where sustenance was scarce and competition was intense. She demonstrated her resilience, quickly learning to adjust to the demanding terms of her surroundings. Now, in a moment seemingly bereft of hope, a phenomenal event unfolded. A mere 5 minutes after Caitlin had birthed an evidently dead cub, a remarkable transformation transpired. Consumed by motherly affection, Caitlin began to tenderly nudge and groom her immobile offspring. Those who witnessed this were engulfed in admiration as, ignited by her persistent and caring nature, the young cub started to display evidence of life. Initially filled with anticipation and subsequent sorrow, the environment was now filled with a renewed sensation of wonder and joy. The story of Caitlin's survival continued, not just due to her determination, but also the unexpected recuperation of her cub, transforming the narrative incredibly. At the height of her health and blessed with nimbleness, Caitlin had narrowly avoided a disastrous forest fire that had abruptly engulfed the jungle. This aggressive inferno burned relentlessly, devouring all in its path. Caitlin had never experienced such a brutal force in her existence as she ran for miles. Each breath scorched her lungs, and her heartbeat was as intense as the primitive rhythms of the planet. Once the devastating inferno finally died down and the smog cleared, Caitlin discovered herself in a radically changed world, a burnt landscape unfamiliar and menacing. Yet she remained untouched. In this desolate environment, Caitlin faced the true challenge of survival, with the once plentiful jungle resources turned to ash. Venturing beyond her familiar grounds was her only option. Driven by an incessant hunger and a robust desire to survive, She navigated through barren vistas and treaded perilous trails that eventually led her to the borders of human society, a society implicated in her mother's demise. With humans, she held a potent skepticism. However, her desperate situation presented no alternatives. Caitlin then faced a multitude of new dangers, including snares laid by poachers and the unsettling noises of a human presence. Regardless, she swiftly adapted to evading human traps, hunting in silence, and seeking shelter in the veil of nightfall. Her life took an unexpected twist during a moonless night when she encountered a wandering goat from an adjacent village. Guided by her instincts, Caitlin's hunting was swift but did not go unnoticed. The startled villagers, keen on protecting their livestock, informed the authorities, leading to an intense pursuit of the tigress, ultimately trapped and exhausted. Caitlin was caught, not by authorities but by the villagers themselves, who in their anger pounced. As villagers argued whether to intervene or defer to the authorities, the tension escalated. In the thick of the chaos, a spear hurled by a villager made its mark on Caitlin, striking her body. This resulted in an agonized roar and a visible wound. At this critical moment, instead of suffering the same fate as her mother, Caitlin was thrown a lifeline. The local wildlife park had been informed of the grim intentions the villagers had for the stranded tigress, and the park rushed to her aid. Caitlin was destined for another path. She found sanctuary within the secure walls of the wildlife park, under the guardianship of a park ranger named Ken. Even amidst a significant change in life circumstances, Caitlin retained her unshakable spirit and gracefully accommodated her new surroundings. In the aftermath of her traumatic experiences, trusting humans proved a hurdle. Gradually, however, Ken succeeded in earning her reliance through regular feeding and attentive care. The wound she sustained became infected, a lingering testament to her harsh ordeal. Though the wound eventually healed, a scar remained that tainted her once immaculate coat. The scar stood as a symbol of remarkable change and signaled the onset of a new phase of her life, saturated with unpredictable changes but laden with chances of restoration and optimism. In the wildlife park, Caitlin was revered for her majestic allure and surprising gentle demeanor, characteristics not often seen in such a powerful creature. With time, Caitlin developed a unique fondness for the park's personnel, particularly Ken, who not only offered nourishment, but also attentively cared for her health. An intense bond was established between Caitlin and Ken, overcoming the common impediments between different species. From his side, Ken developed a distinctive rapport with Caitlin. He had been present since Caitlin first set paw in the wildlife park. And as the years passed, they fostered a deep connection. Ken developed an expertise in discerning Caitlin's temperament. He understood her soft chuff, a tiger's greeting, was an indication of comfort or a need for company. He dedicated endless hours to observing her, understanding her unspoken cues, and fulfilling her needs, regardless of whether they indicated hunger, satisfaction, or a requirement for solitude. The insightful understanding encouraged an affinity with Caitlin that no other human could match. As weeks transitioned into months and months into years, Caitlin's wild existence transformed into one of security and connection within the wildlife park. Guided by the unique bond she shared with her caretaker Ken, Caitlin's past hardships slowly sank into oblivion, marked only by the scars that silently narrated the story of her earlier tribulations. Nonetheless, she began to develop concerns for her well-being when she discovered she was carrying twin cubs. This created a delicate situation given the multitude of scars she bore, necessitating extra caution and significant rest to help her through this critical phase. Unfortunately, the tranquility was suddenly interrupted on a stifling hot day due to an incident at the zoo's main entrance. A careless group of visitors failed to secure the gate, unknowingly offering an opportunity for a crowd of audacious and playful baboons to infiltrate. As the baboons traversed the zoo's landscape, chaos ensued, finally leading them to Caitlin's territory. At this point, the ever-diligent and mindful Ken was stationed at Caitlin's side, the heavily pregnant mammal eyeing the approaching baboons. Caitlin's eyes sharpened, her safeguarding impulse pushing forward not only for her unborn offspring, but also for Ken. As the baboons began to bombard Ken with fruit and loud guttural sounds, Catelyn's agitation intensified. She moved her substantial figure from side to side, a poignant symbol of her untamed nature. Despite Ken's various attempts to disperse the baboons, they were relentless. One daring baboon, driven by sudden audacity, darted into the enclosure with its eyes fixated on Catelyn. Ken was visibly frightened, not for himself but for Catelyn's safety. He was apprehensive that the stress and immediate hazard of the situation could lead her to go into early labor, thus placing her and the cubs at risk. With a resounding roar that echoed throughout the nearby foliage, Catelyn charged towards the intruder. A strong swat at the fence worked as a stern warning, forcing the baboons to flee, their screeching dwindling into the distance. Peace was once again restored at the zoo, while Catelyn and her unborn cubs remained unharmed. Thanks to her swift defensive measures, Ken was left startled. His heart pounded violently, yet he remained untouched physically. Soon enough, zoo personnel reached the spot, secured the gates promptly, and attended to Catelyn, who had moved to a secluded corner of her enclosure. Her breathing was labored, her eyes still fixated on the spot where the baboons were previously present. It was eventually Ken's calming words, along with his placid reassurances, that reduced Catelyn's distress, reminding her that danger was no longer imminent. The on-duty veterinarian confirmed the safety of Catelyn and her twin cubs. As spring's arrival was imminent, Catelyn began preparing for the birth of her cubs. Her agitation had gradually amplified. She paced within her territory relentlessly, driven by potent instinctive triggers indicating the nearing birth of her offspring. The expected arrival of Catelyn's cubs draped the atmosphere in a palpable blend of eagerness and apprehension. The animal caretakers who had formed a bond with Catelyn, one based on professional dedication and true regard, were acutely aware of the risks involved in giving birth to tiger babies, especially considering Catelyn's unique circumstances. They'd expended months on meticulous planning, solicited expert opinions, and designed the pen to mimic a natural birthing environment. They blanketed the den with plush hay and ensured Catelyn had easy access to all required essentials. As the anticipated birth date drew near, an intense tension cloaked the surroundings of the pen. The caretakers made routine checks, their worried eyes glancing at the surveillance monitors, showcasing short glimpses of Catelyn's secluded moments. They quietly deliberated all imaginable scenarios, revealing their worry in their facial expressions. Despite their thorough preparedness, they acknowledged they were ultimately subject to the whims of nature and had limited control. When Catelyn finally entered labor, an ancient wound she had aggravated her distress and detracted from the energy her cub was expected to possess. As the neonate lay inert and silent, the caretakers observed in nervous dread. However, it was Catelyn who sprung to life. Her deeply ingrained maternal instincts surged as she began to tenderly groom her unmoving tot. Each action a composite of hope and desperation. The minutes moved sluggishly as the cub displayed zero vitality, and Catelyn's grooming became increasingly frantic, her subtle distress calls echoing across the pen, piercing the hearts of all observers. The zoo had seen many marvels, but none like this was about to transpire. The passing time was marked by waves of hope and fear. The caretakers were torn, unable to decide if it was better to intervene or let Catelyn rely on her maternal intuition. They knew that any interference could disrupt the fragile connection between the mom and child, yet doing nothing felt like a quiet neglect of duty. As they watched her unceasingly tending to her lifeless cub, emotions overwhelmed them, mirroring the desperation felt by the Tigress. Their deep affection for Catelyn added an element of intensity to the unfolding drama. Despite Catelyn's inability to hear them, the caretakers whispered comforting words, clinging onto hope in the face of despair. In the crisp, refreshing atmosphere, they whispered fortifying words, seeking to soothe the spirit of one, yet to embrace existence. "Hang in there, tiny one," they would whisper. "Your mother is inviting you into this incredible universe." Catelyn continued her dutiful attentiveness. Lo and behold, a mesmerizing wonder unfolded. The tiny cub shuddered once, twice, and took in its inaugural breath with a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. Not only was this sign of life a triumphant victory over inert existence, but it symbolized the deep-seated bond shared between the tigress and her cubs, a bond cultivated by the caregivers. The zoo staff let out a chorus of joyous shouts, but none more impassioned than the triumphant sob uttered by Caitlin, the sound of a mother's affection breathing life into her baby. A wave of relief washed over them. The caretaker's eyes glistened with emotions on the brink of brimming over, as they exchanged subtle, jubilant grins. They threw themselves into rewarding hugs, their bliss uncontained, with salty drops trickling down his face. Ken whispered words of gratitude in light of the wondrous spectacle they had all taken part in, while the commemoration of the cub's reawakening continued. The second cub, aptly named Cub Number 2, made its lively debut into the world, wriggling enthusiastically, ready to seize the gifts of life. Caitlin, the triumphant mother, gathered her babies and initiated their feeding. Ken extended his felicitations and she approached him, allowing for a congratulatory stroke. "Caitlin, you were exceptional," he quietly affirmed her amidst a pat. A touching instance. The memory of the cub's resurgence would eternally serve as a stirring testament of life's fragility and a mother's relentless fortitude. Ensuing days witnessed the zoo trainers care for Caitlin and her babies with rekindled reverence. They catered to her desired treats, fresh chunks of meat, and ensured her hydrating water remained replenishable and chilled. Their communication with her was tender, acknowledging her stellar parenting while expressing their admiration. Zoo onlookers began picking up on the distinct rapport between Caitlin and her trainers. Her softening demeanor when Ken nears her, and the friendly chuff she greets him with any time he hails her, made it clear. Caitlin was more than a dwelling being. She had assumed her role as part of their family. In the coming days, the cub christened Mira displayed a frailty that set everyone on edge. Her growth wasn't as robust as her fraternal counterpart, and her introductory yelps were whisper-like, barely discernible above her siblings' commotion. However, as days duly transformed into weeks, she mustered strength. The zookeepers were steeped in humble pride, witnessing the thriving progression of the cubs. They had partaken in letting a truly awe-inspiring spectacle unfold, a testament to the unyielding force of affection and the capacity to triumph over trials. At the heart of an unforgettable narrative that has captivated viewers and will be passed down across generations is an extraordinary tigress named Caitlin. She demonstrated bravery and tenacity. Despite facing significant challenges, Caitlin, the ever-protective matriarch, constantly remained by her cub's side, immersed herself in its care with unfathomable dedication. She often moved her most loved cub, Mira, to the brightest spot in their enclosure. This unique place was nearly mystical, where the illumination didn't only exist, but appeared to playfully infuse the cub with its life-empowering radiance. How amazing are mothers! We are delighted and thankful that Caitlin and her cub's story had a happy ending. Do you have an inspiring account of a mother who devoted herself completely for her offspring under tough conditions? You are welcome to share it in our comments section below. Moving on to another story, as improbable as it might sound, whenever Mandy visited the tiger exhibit at the zoo, something astonishing happened. On this particular day, her excitement was palpable as soon as she opened her eyes. Expressing herself fully was a struggle for her. Still, she was able to clearly say the word, tiger. With her beloved tiger stuffed toy tightly grasped in her hand, she led her parents, Andrea and Connor, enthusiastically through the zoo. In spite of her parents' propositions to relax in her stroller, Mandy was determined, tugging their hands, excitedly rushing to get to her cherished exhibit in time. Mandy's parents loved these trips to the zoo, since they were among her favorite things to do. Given her deep affection for animals, they observed a new member in the tiger area, a majestic Bengal tiger named Koshi. Relaxing on a stone towards the edge of the enclosure, the habitat was notably extensive and had a vast wall of safety glass. This installation gave an uninterrupted, clear view while ensuring total safety. The moment Mandy reached the exhibit, she ran joyfully between each end, warmly voicing a cordial hello to each tiger. Her interest was particularly aroused by Koshi. While other kids were vying for the tiger's attention, Koshi appeared to be captivated by only Mandy. He gradually advanced to the front, positioning himself straight opposite her, with nothing but the glass separating them. Usually dynamic, Mandy stopped briefly when she was standing in front of Koshi. The tiger locked eyes with her, then in a manner that seemed almost reverent, Koshi started to nod his head in a repetitious motion. Spectators were captivated, particularly Mandy and her folks. Intrigued by the goings-on, Andrea and Connor later crossed paths with the animal caretaker and probed about the tiger's unusual behavior. They learned that Koshi's previous residence was in a different enclosure, frequented by a small girl who bore striking resemblance to Mandy. The young girl had unfortunately lost her life, making Koshi's actions a poignant reminder of a lost young friend. This piece of information stirred deep emotions within all. What was initially deemed a simple interaction between a girl and a tiger took on a deeper meaning. Mandy unknowingly provided Koshi a brief solace, creating a link between his previous companion and the present reality. Without warning, Koshi sprang upon his front limbs and forcefully leaned against the glass. This unexpected move startled the children around him, causing an immediate backwards retreat. In spite of knowing the glass was sturdy, Mandy's parents recoiled in shock. In the midst of the general withdrawal, only young Mandy held her ground. Contrary to stepping back, she bravely moved forward and placed her hands on the glass, right where Koshi's large paws were resting. In response, Koshi bowed his head as if paying respects to her, something that left Mandy's parents, Andrea and Connor, marveling at the sight. The normally noisy crowd around them fell into a brief silence, spellbound by the interaction, but it lasted only momentarily. Other children tried to rekindle the mesmerizing interaction in an attempt to win Koshi's attention, but to no avail. Koshi was more interested in Mandy, who had by now started to scamper along the glass. Koshi mimicked her actions. An onlooker might have found it alarming to witness a tiger seemingly stalking a child, but Andrea felt otherwise. She found no hostility in Koshi's behavior, noticing a distinct sadness in his eyes which seemed momentarily alleviated when he engaged with Mandy. This tender connection continued with Mandy, joyously oblivious of the unusual friendship she had cultivated. Andrea and Connor ensured she didn't obstruct other children's play as she effortlessly mingled among them. With increasing congestion near the tiger exhibit, it became challenging for Mandy to navigate without bumping into others. Andrea and Connor grew concerned as they noticed disapproving glances from other families, and even a vigilant zoo worker keeping an eye on the movement. Understandably, Mandy had dedicated ample time to her fresh fondness for a particular creature, compelling them to wander to the other sections of the wildlife park. Their departure coincided with when a zoo staff was just approaching, causing a missed chance at engagement. The wildlife park proudly displayed spacious enclosures and a range of engagement programs designed to improve the well-being of the animals. The park also offered an array of educational and conservation-centered events that enabled secure interactions with a multitude of creatures. The sojourn wasn't simply about fun, it provided a practical experience and deeper comprehension of animal care and preservation for kids like Mandy. Throughout their delightful visit to the wildlife park, Mandy experienced impressive interactions with various animals. Her day was a spectrum of excitement, feeding ostriches and offering towering leaves to giraffes. They observed from a protected distance as the staff provided the big cats with their meals. Mandy repeatedly engaged in an assortment of zoo activities, offering her assistance wherever the staff needed it. She displayed exceptional fearlessness, especially contrasted with older kids that showed caution around unfamiliar animals. Mandy's unique bonding with animals was something that was evident even outside the wildlife park. Animals instinctively seemed to feel comfortable with her. Whenever she was at a relative's or friend's house with pets, animals that usually kept a distance from kids would feel comfortable cozying up beside her during nap time. Her parents, always cautious, recognized her extraordinary talent of bonding with animals. On a family holiday to an exotic beach, Mandy's affinity for wildlife was once again prominent. Birds would comfortably perch on her shoulder, and dolphins swam close during boat rides. Surrounded by animals that adored her, Mandy felt at home in the wildlife park. The family took a moment to visit the newly born gorillas in the nursery, which Mandy found incredibly adorable. She was particularly fascinated by a tiger named Koshi and repeatedly asked to revisit him. Her parents humorously suggested that teaching her the tiger's name might have been an error since she'd become fond of revisiting him. They spent the entirety of the day at the wildlife park, even opting to eat there. As they paid another visit to the tiger display in the afternoon, the area was noticeably less crowded, offering them a better view. As the day passed, Connor noticed the recurring presence of the same zoo employee along their path, which gave him a peculiar feeling. He thought perhaps the zoo staff member was excessively wary about their interest in the animals. Or maybe he believed they intended to bring a pet home. It stood to reason that the caregivers wouldn't even entertain the thought of their young child injuring an animal or putting herself in a hazardous circumstance. Notwithstanding their child's gentle disposition, they stayed alert and on guard. What set this day apart was encountering the same gentleman multiple times during their zoo visit. Connor noticed him frequently, but decided to keep mum to avoid causing any disruption. As they made their way back to the tiger exhibit, they discovered it deserted. With the preceding family leaving shortly before they arrived, Koshi, the resident tiger, was slouched on a distant rock, his head drooped over the ledge. It was disconcerting to witness such a magnificent and formidable creature appearing downcast. Then in a sudden twist, Mandy, who maintained formalities with her grandparents, took everyone by surprise, calling out, "Koshi, Koshi, come here!" Shockingly, she seemed to have picked upon the tiger's designation instantaneously. As she called out, Koshi's demeanor underwent a radical transformation. He lifted his head and upon seeing Mandy, dashed toward the window, appearing to unsettle the ground beneath him. Observing the enormous tiger hurtle towards the glass could terrify anyone. For a moment, it seemed as though he would crash through. But he stopped abruptly just before the glass, cast his eyes down towards Mandy and gently leaned his paws against the glass, dipping his head in a subtle gesture of admiration that he had previously not shown to anyone. Koshi's exceptional show of regard for Mandy added an element of intrigue. While Mandy kept company with Koshi, her parents took a breather, allowing their child to savor this distinctive encounter. At that moment, the ever-present staff member returned. Samar braced himself, hoping this wouldn't interfere with his daughter's extraordinary interaction. However, the man introduced himself as Sam, the chief zookeeper, and assured them he was there not to intrude, but to shed light on the unusual episode involving Koshi. Sam shared that he had attempted to get in touch with the family to enlighten them on the peculiar actions of Koshi throughout the day. However, every time he tried, he was stalled. Now at last, he got his chance to narrate the sentimental backstory that explained Koshi's behavior and had been a source of concern for the zoo staff for several months. The household was on the brink of understanding the wrenching reason behind why Koshi would always lower his head whenever the little girl was in sight. The young tiger Koshi was a new member of the zoo. He was saved and brought to the facility a few months prior. In those initial moments, Koshi was still too immature to stand his ground among the fellow tigers. His mild temperament luckily eased his transition, and he was quickly accepted into the pack, navigating the first hurdle that was integration in record time. However, this did not imply that everything was in perfect shape. Upon his arrival, it was discovered that Koshi was grappling with deep depression. He displayed zero interest in mingling with other animals and would often seclude himself in the most secluded area of his living space. He abstained from taking part in any of the engaging activities that were meant to draw his participation. In addition to this, he showed minimal interest in food. He ate just enough to keep him alive. This lack of proper nourishment reflected clearly in his appearance, as he was visibly skinnier than the other tigers his size. The process of acclimation proved to be a much greater uphill climb than initially perceived, and his physical condition was far worse than originally assessed. The sad tale that was Koshi's life took its heart-wrenching twist when he was retrieved from being kept unlawfully as a domestic animal. Amidst a haul of several illegal items found during a police raid at a property owned by a man held for an array of crimes, including participating in illegal poaching and black market animal sales, from which he gained greatly, was a young tiger named Koshi. Koshi was first kept in a confined location, but as he matured, he was bound and kept in a smaller section where he could be observed by guests of the owner from a comfortable distance. Fearful of potential dangers, the man had Koshi's claws removed, a merciless act that resulted in severe consequences on his behavior and health. Despite the dire conditions, Koshi found an unexpected source of empathy. Shining as a beacon of mercy in his life was the house cleaner's daughter, also a victim of unjust treatment. She took it upon herself to ensure that Koshi had access to clean water and occasional food. She occasionally provided him with physical solace, giving him the much-needed emotional support. When the law enforcement finally intervened, they confiscated Koshi along with other items as evidence. The rescue became a crucial moment in Koshi's life, opening doors for a chance at a fresh life. While still grappling with distressing reminders from his past, the caregiver's child, Mandy, was enthusiastic about visiting Koshi at the wildlife park. Unfortunately, numerous practical hurdles and financial constraints made her visits infrequent. Koshi, now residing at the park in a bid to recuperate and begin anew, was sadly locked in a struggle with desolation and showed no improvement. However, things took a turn for the better when Mandy came to see him. Her appearance triggered a marked shift in Koshi's demeanor. He seemed to perceive an echo of a past companion in her, even though she was significantly younger. Her genuine benevolence sparked an ember of optimism in Koshi, hinting that he might still surmount his troubles. Recognizing Mandy's beneficial impact on Koshi, Sam encouraged park authorities to facilitate more regular encounters, supporting the advantageous effects for the big cat. The park granted the family an exclusive pass that permitted them to enter early in the day before the general opening hours. This ensured that Mandy and Koshi had undisturbed bonding time, devoid of interference from any other attendees, as a safety measure. Their interactions ensued behind a shielding glass wall, in contrast to Koshi's earlier direct touch with another youthful acquaintance at the original premises, guaranteeing Mandy's safety while enabling their affectionate exchanges. These sessions with Mandy and her family, including Andrea and Connor continuing to attend regularly, cemented Mandy's ties with the park's community. She not only won over Koshi's heart, but also gained the affection and respect of the park staff, who subsequently involved her more in the park's daily tasks. As she grew older, they entrusted her with the task of feeding some of the younger animals. These engagements deeply affected Koshi. Gradually, he overcame his desolation and commenced socializing with other animals, indicating a substantial transformation and a mission successfully executed. Mandy's life also reaped significant benefits from these encounters. Influenced by her time at the park, her bond with Koshi, and the staff, Mandy decided to dedicate her life to animal care. She opted to become a vet at the same wildlife park. This story affirms the magnetic connection possible between humans and animals, along with the profound effect these relationships have her life. It exhibits an extraordinary narrative of recovery and purpose, sparked by the affectionate connection between a young lady and a formerly desolate tiger, displaying love in an extraordinary manner. So, how do these stories make you feel? Let us know in the comment section below. We're excited to know your opinions. That wraps up today's story. Do consider subscribing and lending us your likes. Until the next time.